You're using a centralized version of the internet? It's a world where we neither own nor control our identity, data, or finances. In this current version most of us use, Web 2, the internet is geared towards user-generated content and convenience. That content is controlled by centralized entities like email providers and search engines that have access to your personal data. Then, Web 3 was introduced. It's an effort to decentralize the internet, but a lot of its tools are still controlled by a few centralized entities and aren't very easy to use. And yet, there are good parts of both versions. So, to create a truly decentralized internet, we're combining the accessibility of Web 2 and Web 3's goal of returning control back to you. The result? Web 5. It's a new version of the internet that we're collaboratively building. Web 5 is composed of 3 pillars: decentralized identifiers, verifiable credentials, and decentralized web nodes, all of which are open web standards. Combined, they create a truly decentralized online experience that hands control of your data back to you.
Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I almost said happy Friday since I do this stream on Fridays. But if this is your first time tuning in, I like to call this TBD TV, and it's basically a live stream where I talk with different experts in the SSI industry, and that stands for, if you're not familiar with that term, self-sovereign identity, just learning about like the ecosystem and projects they're working on. This stream is particularly about Bluesky, which you can tell from the title. And basically, Bluesky developed this thing called the app protocol, and they have a reference implementation on top of it. And we're kind of going to learn about how app protocol is changing social media interactions from Dan Abramov. And just my little thoughts on it too. I remember when Bluesky first came out, I got on the hype train. I was like super excited, or at least in 2023, there was a big hype train. It kind of subsided, but I got really excited again when I saw Dan's thread on app protocol, and I would love to learn more about how it works. Before we get into talking with him, I do have a couple of stuff. One is the agenda. So we're gonna start with like softball questions around like career journey and what Bluesky is, and then we'll get deeper and deeper into the app proto. We'll see a demo, and I'll leave room for Q&A. And then also to the audience, I asked y'all a question. Feel free to type in the comments. The question was like, what's the first programming language you learned? I'll say hi to Gonsi Pazzo. I hope I say your name right. And he said he thought there was a second version of you. Awesome. The last thing I want to say before I go into chatting with Dan is letting you all know about the TBDEX hackathon that's happening right now. This is for residents of Africa. So I'm going to go ahead and play the video, and then we'll talk to Dan. All right, cool. So y'all got like a little less than a month to submit so you can get 30K. Hey, Dan. Thanks for being patient while I did the announcement. So first things first, I normally start off with a couple of little icebreaker questions. First, I'm gonna ask you, what's the first programming language you ever learned?
Hi. Yeah, thank you for having me. The first programming language I learned was Visual Basic for applications. It's a version. It's a reduced, simplified version of Visual Basic that you could find inside like Excel and PowerPoint. I learned it completely accidentally by just going through all the menus, and I found the menu where you could record macros. And so you could press a record button and do something, and then press stop, and then double click, and it would show the generated code for kind of automating the thing you just did. And I was like, oh, like I can tweak the number, and it does like a slightly different thing. And so that's kind of how I got into it.
That's kind of cool. Wait, were you like a kid or adult? Like, how did you discover this?
Yeah, I was like 11, I think.
Oh wow. You're just like, what's this? And started playing around it. That's cool.
Yeah.
The first one I learned was SQL because I wanted to learn how to code, but I didn't know what I was supposed to learn. And like after I learned, like I got really deep in the weeds. Like I was doing like stored procedures and all that.
Okay,
And I
okay.
was like, I don't see how this is like making a web app. Like I was really confused. But yeah, I kept digging in more. We have Lost Fish that said they learned C++ first, then Java, Ruby, JavaScript, and Python. And Ace said he learned Q Basic first. That's cool. All right. So my last like warm up question for you too. This might be, I don't know if it's gonna be spicy, but my other question for you, is there any programming languages or frameworks that you're like, it gives me the ick. I don't really like it. Not like roasting them, nothing personal. It's just not for you.
I think I still like I'm very ambivalent about Python.
Okay.
Like I kind of understand like the appeal of it,
Yeah.
and then yet like every time I have to use it, I'm like, "Ugh, I can't, not quite for me." But I almost like start liking it, but like in a kind of it's also hurting me somehow. I don't know if that makes sense.
It's no, I get you. You're like, all right, I get it. Then you're like, it turned me off in some way. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah.
I think Angie will hate me, and she already, I think she already knows this for saying this. Java is too much for me, too verbose. I just like to type. I like type words, and then the effect comes out, like whatever the result is. I don't want to like write a whole bunch of stuff just to do one thing. All right, now I'm gonna jump into like the actual topics. First off, I'm sure everybody asks you this, but what drew you to going from Meta, which is one social media app, to Bluesky, which is like a decentralized social media? Is it that you just like really love social media applications, or the decentralized nature of things drew you, or is it something else?
Yeah, I wasn't really like when I joined Meta, I wasn't really joining like, I wasn't using Facebook like myself as a product. Didn't really find it too exciting, but I really liked React. We were using React at our like startup where I worked before, and it just seemed like, this is a nice opportunity to work on React itself. And then, if you work in an open source library, the hope is that, other people can use it, other companies can use it, and, maybe somebody will build like a better Facebook in the future using it. So it seemed like that is a good investment of my time. So I stayed at Meta for 8 years. And with Bluesky, it was kind of random, actually. I was thinking that I would not even want to work at a company. Like I was thinking maybe I don't know, become a YouTuber or like sell courses or
You can
something
be
like
making
that.
money.
Yeah, yeah. But it just seemed like a perfect intersection of everything that I just couldn't pass it up because like I'm I'm a heavy user of Twitter as a product. Like it's one of my favorite products. At least it used to be. And it felt like a kind of interesting moment in time where, like somebody was implementing essentially an open source Twitter. Like you can see Bluesky is kind of an open source Twitter with some very interesting ideas that I think I didn't fully grasp at first. Like, the ad protocol, I think I only kind of understood it later. But I I think the first thing that kind of jumped out to me is just that your name is your username, and that just seemed to make so much sense in retrospect. I was like, of course, that's how it should work. Like, we already have a top level identity system on the web. Like, why, why would we, like, why do you need to ask a company to like give you some username that it can later take away? And it just kind of made sense. And so I think that was like the first thing that drew my attention is that, oh, that's like an interesting design choice. Um, but I also like that it's open source. It was also fully built with React. So I was thinking, oh, this is an opportunity for me to kind of step into product developer shoes and see, what it feels like to actually use the stuff that we've been, cooking, like to build a real app. I haven't been like in product development for years, so it was interesting to kind of come back to that. And because again, like it's one of my favorite products, kind of like as a genre. Um, and I think the biggest one is just I like the team. Like I talked to some people on the team. I saw their kind of I like the engineering culture a lot. It seemed to make this like there was a sense of like idealism and pragmatism at the same time, and kind of like how the product is dog food in the protocol and how they kind of reinforce each other. And that just reminded me of how like on the React team we also had like the product was like dog food in the library, and then it kind of forces you to like stay grounded to your reality while making something a little idealistic and a little kind of out there. And so I think that is like it just felt like, oh, it's at an intersection of like all my interests. So I guess like I just have to do it. Like I was planning to take like a at least like a long vacation, and then it was like, oh, whatever, like I'll just start immediately.
In
So that's
another
kind of how
world,
it happened.
in another world, you would be Dan, the YouTube influencer. But I think this was a good choice based on all of your interests. I think one thing you mentioned was the username thing. I think I remember everybody getting excited about that. Even like Kelsey Hightower was like, "Yo, I can make my domain name um, be the same as like I can make my username be my domain name, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so two things. Can you confirm with me how it works? Because sometimes I explain it to people and then people start mansplaining DNS records to me. From my understanding, right, is you get a subdomain, it connects to or it resolves to a decentralized identifier, which is like a globally unique identifier. People in Web5 are familiar with this. And then basically there's like this did document, and inside of there's like a property that says aka, and then it points to that subdomain or domain or handle. Is that how it works? Am I missing any pieces?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit confusing to think about. So I think for people who are like not in this space, this sounds like a bunch of like what is a do
Yeah,
document?
what do you
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, like like I've been working on the Bluesky app for like almost a year, and I learned what a do document is like 2 weeks ago. So it's not really like something you're like exposed to as a user or even as a developer, like building for it.
Yeah.
Um, but like I think like from kind of like practical point of view, right? Like the way I would think of it is just that um, the domain name acts as a handle. So this is something you can change over time. It doesn't have to be like the same one forever. You're not tied to one domain, but it's kind of like a user readable handle for your identity. And so this is something you can swap out later, just like you can swap out the hosting provider. Um, I think it's important to note that the domain name is not really where your data is hosted. So we really use your domain name as, although you could, in principle, also host it like at the same domain, but we decouple that. So we really use the domain name as your kind of friendly username, but that is like that is like the extent to which it is important. And the we of course have to verify that you actually own it. So there's like two mechanisms. One is you we so when we resolve which identity the domain name corresponds to, we shoot a DNS. So we check the DNS records. If you have the TXT record with @proto that points to your identifier, then that's how it gets resolved. We also support an HTTP call. So when our library, like our SDK, when it resolves a domain, it shoots both the DNS check and the HTTP, whichever comes back first. So this is kind of similar to how verifying a domain in Google Analytics works, right? Like you have to host a file or you have to add a DNS record. It's kind of similar to that. And then if we're talking about the technical details of like how do we verify that it's bidirectional, right? Like we want to make sure the domain claims the identity is yours. Like how do we make sure that the domain is not like lying? It's like we fetch. There's a registry. We fetch. It's kind of like npm registry almost. Like we fetch a D document, which is kind of like a package JSON, but for you, and that document is just a JSON thing that says here's the domain. So we just verify that is that did you really say that this is your domain? And so this is how we verify the bidirectional check.
Perfect. I think that was a good description for people who might not be like embedded in this space. We have Josh that says the domain name as verified username idea is awesome. Really nice to be able to use that. And then one of my last, I have a lot of questions, but let's see. Okay, so I think you had mentioned this slightly, and then I watched another interview with you where you said like the decentralization aspect is not like really up in your face in Bluesky. And I'm curious how, like, what's your perspective on that, how it's affected the user experience or benefited it or been a disadvantage or whatever?
Yeah, I think like from my perspective, there's a lot of baggage that comes with the word decentralized. So like, for example, like I'm giving a talk about that Prado in September, and I don't know if I'm even going to say the word decentralized in it like at all.
People
Like
are
maybe a
scared of
couple of
that word.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like you kind of, like a lot of people associated with the crypto stuff and like the blockchain and like all of that jazz. So there's like concerns there. There's also the baggage of when you hear decentralized, a lot of people imagine peer-to-peer architectures where it's like, thick clients talking to each other, which does not scale for a lot of use cases. And it's just, there are things that it solves well, but there's a lot of things that it doesn't solve well. Or people imagine something like Mastodon, where it's like servers talking to each other, and there's like many instances of the same app. And again, it's not really how the web works in general. So it's there are some like valid cases I think for that, and like some people enjoy that. But for the mainstream audience, I think there's also a lot of off-putting things about that. And like our kind of brand of decentralization and our kind of decentralization is really the same one as the web itself, right? Like if you think of web itself, like when you go to like mywebsite.com or like google.com or whatever, like web is decentralized. It uses like DNS, it uses like different hosting providers, TCP IP, whatever that thing resolves to. But from the user perspective, it feels almost centralized. It's almost like a file system. You just say like, I want to go to this folder in like this site, and it just gets you there. And that is the kind of that is the decentralization we're aiming for. Is that it is permissionless in the sense of different, like anyone can join the system, right? Like anyone can like connect the server to it, or it can be like a company that hosts data and so on, or like anyone can make an application, but you're not really exposed to it as a user, and so it's not so much an ideological thing, I think, which is I think like different approaches are fine, but we try to focus on like what are the benefits to the user.
Okay. Yeah, that I do like that approach because some people don't even know it's decentralized. They're just like, I just want to use it. Okay,
Yeah.
so you mentioned like that you work on the product Bluesky, like the actual app. But what's motivated you to dig into app protocol? And how far have you dug into it? Because this is going to help me decide if I go too hard with the questions or not.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I initially started working on the app. We have like a React Native app using Expo, so it's cross-platform. It supports iOS, Android, web as well. And so for a while, I was just doing like product development and like adding features on the front end. Started got a little bit into management as well, and we often have to kind of interface with the backend. So because like we need to coordinate how we add the features, and a lot of features are full stack. And so I kind of got exposed a bit more to protocol concepts. And I think at first it really annoyed me, actually. I was feeling like I don't understand like what this is about. Like, why is this like API a bit weird? And to be honest, like a lot of the DevX is not, it's still rough. Like we're making progress, but it's still in a kind of in a phase where it's like more for like early adopters. Um, but as I was digging into it and like really understanding the ethos of it, and also um, as we're expanding it to support arbitrary applications, because it used to be that like we have just one app and we don't really explain how to build other apps on top of it. Whereas like, there were like multiple Bluesky clients, but they were all like for Bluesky content. But now we're actually like going to promote and like encourage people to try building other apps that have nothing to do with Bluesky. Like they could use Bluesky data because everything is open, but they don't have to, and they could store like something else there. I think that is where I started understanding. Oh, like this is what it's about. Like this is like it's kind of like a different way to like a different relationship really between the users and the products. So that's what's gotten me excited about it. And as I got a few kind of like mental models for like how it works, it just ended up a lot simpler than I thought. And so I was like, I have to explain it to other people because like it's exciting to me, and I think like I want more people to understand what we're doing. Even if it doesn't work out, like I think just getting the word out so that like next person who comes up like can build on top of this prior art and kind of use that as an inspiration.
Yeah, even no, your explanation was great on in the thread, and it made me realize, whoa, there's like so many similarities between some of the like Web 5 concepts we have, like decentralized web nodes kind of act very similar. So I was like, wait, I really want to hear about it. Okay, this question is a little
Yeah, and
bit.
sorry, just wanted to say like in terms of the depth, I think like I have like a medium understanding,
Media?
so maybe not extremely deep, but like fairly. I think I've gotten much
Okay.
better in like the last couple of weeks. So you can try grilling me. I will say if it's too much.
Okay, perfect. All right. So then this question is maybe one that people outside the Web 5 community might not be too familiar with, but people within would. So I did notice that Blue Sky uses like a did called did PLC. I looked it up. It stands for did placeholder. I thought that was funny. But I'm curious, like, what led to that decision of using or creating their own did method rather than using like existing did methods, because right now there's like over 100 did methods, and like even TBD they made their own. I'm like, whoa, what made y'all be like, we need this custom one?
Yeah, so this happened before me, so I don't have like a full kind of complete complete knowledge of like how exactly things have planned out. Um, it is kind of funny that it's called placeholder because initially I think the team was thinking that this is like a temporary kind of thing that like they want to replace later. And actually, with time, the team has gotten around to actually it's pretty good, and it has. So I think in terms of like why none of the so we support two did methods. We support did PLC, which is this one, and we also support did web, which is much more basic. It just uses your domain as the actual identity. But like if you lose your domain, like you're screwed because it's not going to be able to resolve it anymore. Um, and I think I can't speak to like all the like cryptographic stuff because like I'm not super like well versed in it. My understanding is just the DPLC has a bunch of properties that we care about, and the like my kind of understanding of it, I really think of it. It's kind of similar to npm registry, right? Where we store the um, like kind of your current document that describes just like JSON that says here's your public key, so we can verify anything you write that it's really written by you. Here's your hosting provider, so here's the HTTP server we're gonna hit when we want to ask your data, and here's your domain handle, which is the handle that represents like user friendly name for your identity. And then this is something that only you can write to, and you can update. You can either like change the hosting provider by pushing the change to the registry, or you can update the domain name. And then because everything is signed and there's like there's like a hash of the previous version embed it in the next version of the document, and then the DID, this like long identifier is actually the hash of the first version of the JSON, and we serve all versions. So this register serves every version. What this means effectively is that it's actually self-verifying. So if you have that JSON, you can just ask, and like you get all the previous versions, you can definitely verify that we have not tampered with it. So you actually don't need to trust that we're not lying, because it's completely auditable. And so this is why we're thinking that it's actually a pretty good method, even though like technically it's centralized in the sense that like we run this registry, but it is verifiable, so we can't lie. And also we want to eventually we want to pull it out into independent legal entity, and ideally it would be governed similar to ICANN, right? Like top level domains are also governed by a centralized entity, but like it's as independent as like humanly possible, and that is kind of what we want to reach with DID-PLC as well.
That's cool. Okay, then this is my last did question. So oftentimes people, I think I was trying to understand from your explanation, but let's see, because I was like, maybe you answered it. I'm not sure. Um, Oftentimes people like anchor their dids on the blockchain, but Bluesky is blockchainless. So is TBD, right? Like we anchor ours on something um like BitTorrent. We anchor it on BitTorrent. Do you happen to know where yours is anchored? I think you said like you guys own it, but like is it
It's just a website you hit over HTTP.
just the
It's
website?
like
Okay.
you just plc.directory. You just curl it plc directory /
Oh,
something, it returns something, and then because the results are like you can verify them, then you know that like we're not lying about the output. In principle, like somebody else could run it, and we would like to move it outside of the company eventually. But I think of it very similarly to npm registry.
okay, cool. So it is what you did mention that. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to play a little quiz with y'all in the audience, so you don't lose us. You're not falling asleep. And once we come back, we'll jump into at Proto and we'll look at a demo as well. So Dan, I guess get ready. But yeah, this quiz is really short, really fun, and feel free to put your answers in the comments. All right, good job, everyone. I seen y'all participating. Even someone said not sure. Good effort. All right, so let's talk about at Proto. That's what everybody came here for. How would you describe, like, just for beginners, right? How would you describe at Proto, and like, what is its relationship to Bluesky?
Oh, that's that's the big question, right? Like, how do you describe this thing? Like, that's what I've been figuring out. I think the top. Okay, so here's how I would describe it, and it's a bit of like a history. Can I like going back in history, right? So I think it's trying to answer the question of like what is the relationship between people and products on the web, and like just like the spaces that exist on the web, like how do they relate to the people that inhabit them. And on the early web, which is sometimes called Web 1.0, that relationship was very clear, right? Like if you have a domain that is like you can host a website at your domain, and you can put stuff into it. So you can publish your pages, Like the stuff you publish is yours. Nobody's gonna, mess with it, like change what you put there. Nobody's gonna be able to like reorder it or like hide some of it or like do something with it. And you could always remove it. You could always like change it up. You could move your hosting to some other company. It doesn't care. Again, like um, it's kind of like the hosting is decoupled from the content, and you really have like full control over the content. But of course, we're social creatures. Like we don't want to exist in these like isolated spaces from each other. We want to kind of be together in different spaces. And we also want to be able to enforce some rules for the spaces. We want to aggregate stuff in the spaces. We want to like post comments in a post, or like we want to see a feed, or like the earliest example is like actually like search engines. Like we want to see search results from different sites, like aggregated from different places on a single page. And so that is kind of the the shift that is sometimes called Web 2.0, that I think arguably like is lost in like this kind of architecture is lasting to this day. But what happened is that the importance of this like top level, like people being top level, it kind of went away because we've had to replicate the same structure within a box for each social space that we're in. So like there's like this Facebook, and there's like this space, like a box in which like we have our pages. It's almost like like mini web, but it's inside a box. And there's like Twitter, and it has its own like connections and likes and so on. There's like another like mini web inside a box. And so we have many of these boxes, and we're kind of splintered between them. And the thing is, when we put something into those boxes, we kind of lose meaningful ownership over it. And I don't mean ownership in some like abstract, ideological way. I mean more like, if the product goes in a direction that you don't like what can you do? Like I can download my Twitter data, and they'll email me a zip file like 3 days later with a bunch of JSON, and then like, well, what do I do with that JSON? It's dead data, right? Like I can't really do anything useful with it, and we can't do anything useful with it collectively. And so I think at Prado is kind of an attempt to answer this question of like, how else could we structure this so that we retain all the lessons of like building scalable backends from the current era of the web, where we know how to like aggregate things very effectively, how to serve them to users. Like we don't want to lose this like client server paradigm. It's really good. But what if we add another layer on top that is shaped like the web, that is shaped like the early web, where you as a person are like a top level entity. You have some like almost like a Dropbox. You have this like place where your like Twitter posts or Stack Overflow answers, or like all this public information can live. That is like by schemas defined by the application, and then applications act as like aggregators of that stuff, just like Google aggregates from different websites. What if like applications could kind of listen to like everything that happens in these repositories and adjust their databases? And then from that point level below, it's really traditional web app. Like you just talk to the database, but it's just the database is like the source of truth has moved to the user. And so now you have this like interesting cases where apps can kind of use each other's data. You can build a new social app that reuses the data from other apps. Apps can kind of integrate with each other and show content from each other. Just a much more dynamic kind of marketplace of apps, I guess. So I think that is like the big idea is like keeping the current web architecture. It works really well, but adding this like user-centered ethos from early web and connecting the two by aggregation.
It sounds really similar to some parts of Web 5 for me. Like it sounds like yours is almost like the social media focused version. Because even when I first joined TBD, one of the things that like made it click for me, I was like, oh, okay, like you have a Google Drive or a Dropbox, but they can easily change terms of service. They can take away, like you see Google, they often cancel their products and then you lose everything. But rather than that, you will have like your own little server box that you can take with you, and then apps will read from that. So it sounds very similar to that. Now you showed like this app on Twitter. I'll say hi to Pablo. What's going on? You showed this app on Twitter that I would love for you to, or you linked it to, I would love for you to show it to the rest of the stream. Are you okay with me pressing share? Awesome. Cool.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, so this is a little demo. So this is my Bluesky profile page. This is kind of the web app, right? Like the web app looks like a traditional web app. It's just a bunch of posts. And on this tab, this is a browser of content in my @product repository. So this is the actual kind of this like top layer, right? This like data storage. It happens to be hosted by Bluesky as well, but it could be, I could actually move it to my own hosting if I wanted to. Like another company could host it. It's completely decoupled from Bluesky. And it shows the content that is in my repository. So there is a bunch of collections. So the collections are namespaced by, this is a reverse namespace. So because Bluesky is bsky.app, collections that belong to the Bluesky app start with app.bsky. And for example, this is my collection of posts. So if I click on it, and somebody just built this tool. This is like an open source tool that somebody built to use in our SDK. And so these are my posts. And this is my last post. I will actually create a new post now. So I will just say hello there.
We're
and
doing it live. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and you can see here it is. So this is the new one. If I click on it, yeah, it says hello there. So this is a record in my repository. Like when I post on Bluesky, it goes into my repository first. And any application can subscribe to my repository. And actually, we offer a fire hose that transmits all records from all repositories. So any app that cares about consuming it would see that I posted something, like I created a new JSON object of the type app.bsky feed post with the text hello there. And then, for example, so we represent all public content this way. So there's also here's like my likes. And I can go and like my own post, and here's the like.
Ooh.
So you can see that when I like something, it creates a record in my repository of the type app.bsky feed like, and it says, okay, what did I like? Well, here's the address of the post that I like. That it's kind of like a link to data. And so you can see it starts with the protocol. So it's kind of like a higher level protocol on top of HTTP that is able to do this like resolution of the domain name to the identifier, and then to my hosting, and then it just talks to my hosting to figure out like to actually ask for the content of the post. So if I click on it, I go to my post. But then really the key thing is that I can also go and I can like somebody else's post, right? And so here's my like. And so the key thing is that so this is the like that I just gave to this post by another user. And you see this is the post I just liked, and then this is their profile. These are like their collections. And you see it says like service endpoint here at the bottom. This is their hosting provider. And so their hosting provider, I'll actually double check because I don't know. So I'll check, let me check mine as well. So yeah, we're actually served by two different hosting providers. In this case, both of them are, they're both belong to Bluesky, but these are different hosts. So this data is actually stored on two different servers. And when we resolve it, like it goes to it, it sends HTTP requests to different servers. But the Bluesky app aggregates it, right? Like it serves as this like aggregator. So this is why it's able to show all the posts from different users, even though like some of them may be from, the actual data may be hosted in different servers. But because it kind of streams in from all the servers into the apps, into the backends, the Bluesky app just saves it in the database. And so that is kind of how it's able to like aggregate it. And then from that point on, it works like a traditional web app.
Ooh, okay. I have a lot of questions. I don't know which one to ask first. I guess I'm not okay. If I wanted to create an app on top of App Proto, how would I go about doing that? Like I feel like that's stepping away from this, but like that's on top of my mind.
Yeah. So we're going to. This is a little bit work in progress. Like we're just starting to kind of focus on the on the use case of like third-party apps. So one thing that we literally just added is the sign in with Prado. So we're adding OAuth, because previously I had to sign in with like a special app password from within Bluesky, which was kind of weird. So we're decoupling that so that you would be able to like actually like sign up and sign in using a Prado like identity in general. But the general, so we're gonna publish a tutorial in a couple of weeks. So you can, it's not out there, but there will be a tutorial and there will be an example app. But the way to think about it, and I'll actually show you,
Yes,
I'll show you somebody's app that somebody built. Oh, I think it's down.
Oh no.
Well, let's see. Maybe there's. So I have this events.smoke. Okay, so that's smoke signal.events.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this is, I just logged in by OAuth, and yeah, this is my profile on this website. It uses my identity. It's an event where yeah, like I think I signed up as I'm going to this event because this is a talk preview that I'm planning to give in next week. But yeah, like here's somebody else who created created an app using NetPro, and you can see that essentially what they do is so here's my profile record from this app, which I guess I don't have any profile information. I haven't filled it in. And here's an RSVP that I left. So here's like, I said that I'm going to this event, and here's the link to event that somebody else created that I signed up on. And so the flow that you would go through as app developer is that you create a normal web app. It's just a completely normal web app. Then the second step is you add OAuth. So you add like sign in with, similar to how you would add like sign in with Google, except it's kind of like sign in with the web, right? Because like we're building this like layer where like everybody can participate. So we call it the atmosphere because it's like at proto atmosphere. It's like above everything. Yeah. So maybe it will be like sign in with atmosphere. We'll see. But essentially you add like just normal like OAuth callback so that you can store the session. And from that point on, like you're just able to write and read records to users repository under the your namespace. So you can create your own types. You can define a schema. For example, here's like my apps post, or like an event, or like a friendship, or whatever concept that is like public data. We currently only support public data. We plan to support private state in the future. For now, we're focused on public use case. And so you define a schema that's kind of just like similar to JSON schema. And we have a tool that generates TypeScript types from it. So it generates like a type definition. And then in your code, you listen to the firehose. So you kind of subscribe to this thing that like streams in the records. And you say like, I'm interested in records of this type. And so the data flow is kind of like, you create a record, like if somebody posts something, you create a record of that type, you just put it into user's repository, and it will immediately come back to you through the firehose. But then the reason to listen to the firehose is that other apps can also write records of that type. So like other apps can kind of, interoperate with you if the user allows them. And also like other apps can kind of interpret the data you put on the firehose, and you can also interpret other apps' data. So for example, you could read my Bluesky profile identity and use that to kind of fill out my profile initially, but then maybe like other things, you would use your own types for that.
Okay, that was interesting. I'm trying to like process it because I did have a question on streaming, but or the event subscriptions, and you kind of talk about. Could you go deeper? How does the apps how do apps subscribe to all these different events?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Yeah, so you can see the contents again. Like this is the content of my this is the content that's stored on my server. So these are my collections. This is kind of the source of truth, right, for my data. This is like what's being hosted. It's important that I can always move it. Like I don't actually have to like stick with the same, as long as I can like host. It's kind of like a Git repository almost. It even uses like some similar data structures. So I can host it somewhere else. All I need, like if I change the host, then I can just like point my did record to another host, and that's where that will become the source of truth. And then the contract of this repository, like it implements a couple of HTTP methods, like just like routes. Like one thing it can do is like enumerate collections. So that's how you get this collection list. It can enumerate items within the collection, so you can see like the likes collection. It enumerates all records of the type, and you can also read a specific record. So the server lets you enumerate stuff that lives there, and it also lets you subscribe by WebSocket. So the other API is that you can subscribe to my personal data server via WebSocket, and then every time something is added or removed or changed, it just emits a commit essentially that says here's the thing that happened, and so you can like with the diff, and so you can update your local representation according to that diff. Now the problem is you don't really want to like if you have like 2,000 like 200,000 users or something, like in Bluesky, it's like 500,000 users who are like active daily, and like 6 million users like in general. Like you don't want to listen to all of their repositories separately from your backend, because that's kind of wild, right? Like you don't want to have six, like a lot of them will be hosted on the same server, but still, like you don't want to have like 500 connections. So what we provide is we provide a node called Relay that does that for you. So it crawls. You can think of it similar as Google. Like it crawls the entire network by these like at links. So it, like if it sees like a like for a post in this repo, it's like, what is this repo? So it's gonna fetch that, and it also acts as a network-wide cache. So it's a cache of the entire network, like its current state, and then your app just talks, and it implements the same contract. So it also lets you enumerate all records, and it also lets you subscribe by a WebSocket. So essentially, like from the backend perspective, you just, and it's like that's what we call the fire hose, right? It's like the global kind of log of the entire network. And as a backend, you just subscribe to the fire hose and you filter the events of the types you care about, and then you kind of adjust your database in response to them. And I want to say like this sounds very centralized, and like practically it is, but this node is an optimization. It's not it's not like essential to the system. Anyone else can run a node like this. If you want to like run it for your private consumption with the current network volume, it's about $150 a month. So it's not even like that expensive, and even though it's like 500K active users. But like we think like with time we'll probably have to like scale it, and like you would maybe have like application specific relays that filter out only stuff that like an app cares about. But for now, this like one global node for the entire network actually works quite fine.
Awesome. And just to make sure I understood, they use Node Relay and they'll filter out by, like you just said, type. So you can say like, I don't know why you would only want likes on your page or whatever, but you're like, I only want the type of like. Oh wait, you've been mentioning like personal data servers, data repositories, collections, records. I kind of, in my mind, I think I have an idea of what each thing is just from like mapping it to like Web5 DWNs, because we have this idea of records too. But can you tell us like the relationship or the hierarchy? Like how are they all interacting, especially for people who they don't know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of like some of what I've been showing. So you can think of like here's everything that lives in my repository, right? I have this like handle that is like a nice way to refer to me, but the handle can change over time. This is my real identifier, so it's actually like that's what it gets resolved to. Like it's the same. This is you can think of it as like almost like an IP address for identity, if that makes sense. So it uniquely identifies me. And then my stuff is hosted on a certain server, right? Like as a user, I have a relationship with the hosting service. So in this case, it's hosted by Bluesky. In principle, other companies could come in and host it, or I could even host it myself and just put my own server here. And then my own server, we provide like a Docker container and open source, like an open source implementation of that server, so you can actually like run it yourself if you want to. But we provide hosting. And so what happens when the app just hits the like it resolves the which server serves my data, and then the server contains these collections. So a collection is just a bunch of JSON records. A collection has a name it uses reverse namespace of the app. So bsky.app becomes app.bsky. Smoke signal.events. This is the name of this website. Then its namespace becomes events.smokesignal. And then after that, it's just up to you. It's like your application specific types. You define the schema for them. So for example, like a post, here are all the records with the post, and then the record is just a JSON object. So it's not displayed as JSON here, but imagine like curly braces around it. It's just JSON. So you have this JSON records of types that are specific to the application, that are defined by the application that like puts them there. You have these collections, which is a bunch of records. You have these repositories, which is just a bunch of collections. And then these repositories are hosted on personal data servers, and you can choose, you can move where they're being hosted, because just like Git, it's like the content kind of verifies itself. So because it's signed, you can actually move it somewhere else, and the app can still verify that it was actually written by you. Or it can be cached somewhere like in the middle of the system, like on Relay, and the app can still verify like cryptographically that it was written by you because it's signed. This is like the data itself represents the content.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you. And we have a question that came in from Emodomi, and they asked like, is App Proto only useful for publicly available data, or are there any kind of permissions? I have this question too, because with DWNs we have like user created protocols, right? So like a user can create a protocol and they can say, oh, I only want Dan to see my post or something like that. Or they can say, I only want people who have like the role of like friend to be able to see my posts and stuff like that. So I'm curious, does App Proto also have that?
Yeah, so for now we're focusing just on the public data. We will be adding support for private state and shared state, where it's selectively shared with the applications that the user has consented to. For now, that's not the main focus, because there's just so much juice in just the public use case. And because the model is additive to the normal web, right? Like there's always the normal web layer where you can just keep stuff in your database, if it's private, and you don't have to like put it on this like in the atmosphere. So for now, yeah, the focus is just on the public data, but we will be adding support for private data later. And I want to kind of note that I think like one difference, and I'm not sure, like maybe I'm misrepresenting the Web 5 stuff, but I think like one of the differences maybe like Web 5 stuff sounds a bit more peer-to-peer to me, and like correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like part of what you use this like system of permissions like for is for write access, where for example, like I have a post, somebody else wants to comment on it, so like they have to have permissions to write to my repository. So that is not how a product works, because in our model, the only person who can write to your repository is you. So that is kind of the defining part of the model, is that like maybe we'll add later some capability to like collaborate in some way, but like right now the model is that only you can write to your repository. But for example, for leaving a comment, that's actually sufficient, because just like I showed with somebody else posted a post in their repo, I posted a like linking to their post in my repo, and then the app has aggregated this information into the database where it just keeps the like count and like who liked which posts, and like the client just talks to my database. So we actually don't need permission model to model the aggregation, because aggregation just naturally falls out of, well, you just take all the information you get and then you aggregate it as any way you want.
Yeah, I think I think that might be like a big difference between it. Yeah. And I don't think we have aggregation as yet, and we're coming out with subscription. Yeah, the parts that I see that were similar was more of like the structure with like the records and then having a data
Yeah.
server like that. But yeah, we might be more peer-to-peer. Like we by default, you would only be able to write to your DWN, but if you wanted to give somebody permissions, then you would have to like have that set in the protocol. So okay, my one of my last questions, I guess, is like on the website you all talk about like you have algorithmic choice on Bluesky. So what exactly does that mean? Can you bring your own algorithm to Bluesky and say like this is how I want this to be set up?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a starter kit for that. So
Ooh.
um, you can create your own feed. And the way you do it is you just consume from the fire hose. It's the same model. So you just
True.
have an app that's running, and it receives all the records. So it sees when people like stuff, it sees when people follow each other, it sees when people post something, it sees when people repost, and you get an event stream of like all of these actions, and then you can decide, you can show stuff that's popular, or like filter it by topic, or run a machine learning algorithm, or like run a clustering algorithm, or just like really anything you want to do there. And then there's, as long as you have some URL where that's being hosted, like your service is being hosted there, you can create a record in your, like, as a app.bsky.feed or something like this, and
Okay.
then it will appear in the application under like a feeds tab on your profile. So just to kind of show that, like let's go to maybe Jeremy's profile. He has a lot of feeds, and so Jeremy runs Quiet Posters feed. So this is like a feed from posts of people don't post super often, and yeah, this is just some code running somewhere in, like not on our servers, and it's just like a third-party thing that you can just add, you can add to your homepage, and now it's somewhere. Oops, yeah, now it's here. Yeah,
Ooh, that's kind of cool. Okay, it kind of looks like how like in the community or list tab in Twitter, but that's cool that he made it.
yeah, but it's driven by code. Yeah,
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, yeah. Rather than just like the user interface, that's so cool that
yeah.
they
There's a feed called Ratio, which
let me see.
includes posts that get the most, get ratioed the most.
I'm dead.
So
That's
it's
cool.
kind of
Wait,
funny.
how do you? Okay, that's cool. That's cool. I kind of want to go in and like try to create my own now. I abandoned my Blue Sky profile, but not for a bad reason. It just there's too many social media profiles for me to keep up with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think like it's still, as a product, like it's still kind of in the early stages where we're like catching up on some basic features. Like you still can't mute somebody's reposts, right? Like that's like a basic Twitter feature, but we're like, yeah, we're gonna build it like soon. So a lot of people kind of bounced, but I think, if we like first, like the vision is much bigger than Blue Sky, right? Like it's really about building this like shared layer for web apps that want to be like more open and more interoperable. But even like Blue Sky, the product is like it's slowly getting there, but there's still a lot that we need to add to make it compelling to people.
Yeah, and I mean, Twitter took years to be built, so like I think y'all did an amazing
Yeah.
job so far. All right, so I will feel free, folks, to people in the audience to ask questions. If for now, I'm gonna play a little video to give y'all time to think about questions. If you don't have any questions, I'll like ask some of my last questions and we'll wrap up. But so far, I found this pretty interesting. So this video is basically just doing a shout out to our community members from July 2024. Okay. So if there's still no questions, I'll keep checking out. Just mostly people were saying hi or like while you.
Oh.
Oh no, that's so awkward.
I
Sorry.
was wondering if it's just me or
Huh?
do I have to run the show now?
I know, imagine. I hope I didn't leave too long. I tried to be like super fast when I came back. But what I was saying was, oh, it was mostly just people saying like while you were giving the demo, they were like, this is really interesting. Um, and I think some of my questions are less around like blue sky and more like for you. Like I'm curious if like your experiences from building like React and Redux, like do you feel like they helped you to digest information from at Proto better? I don't know, because I'm like you went from like building a framework to now you're building a product, but you still have to kind of understand the API in the background.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's well, I think like philosophically, I really like this approach where like you work on something bigger, right? Like you work on something that's like lifted out of the product and not just like part of the product.
Yeah.
But you use the product to inform what this thing is and kind of to stay grounded to reality. Something like that. That's what we were doing in React, and then I think it's kind of like a similar vibe with at Proto and Bluesky.
Mhm.
Um, and I think just like some of the metaphors, like it's really like as a React developer, like I think that's actually like when I started realizing, oh, there's this like similarities in the design that are like you can almost think of it as like in React, there's this concept of lift and state up, where you're like, I don't want the state to disappear when this component unmounts. I'm going to move it to the parent. And they're like, oh, I don't want it to disappear when the browser closes the tab, so I'm going to move it up to local storage. And then maybe like, oh, I don't want it to disappear when like the user changes devices, so I move it up to the server. And you were really kind of stuck with the like, the server is like the last frontier of like where you keep the data. But like if you wear the user hat, like the server is not, like the server exists as long as your product exists, but product change, market conditions change, and really as a user, like when I post on Stack Overflow, I don't want. It's not like I'm gifting my work to Stack Overflow to do anything with it that they want, right? Like it's more like I just express myself in the Stack Overflow format, but it's not that I want to put stuff in a box owned by Stack Overflow. And so, like, what if we lift state up one more time? And the source of truth for that state is really it's me. Like I am the source of truth for my data. And it's just like, what if we put the data in the right place, like outside of the product? So I think it's like this kind of React metaphor of lift and state up. It really like helped me click. Oh, it's just like unidirectional data flow for the entire web, where like all apps can kind of listen to it. And then it also might remind you of this like Flux architecture where it's like your backends are kind of like stores, like reducers, and there's this like event log. So it's actually like it's kind of like taking this, like unidirectional data flow and just like putting it all over the web.
I like that as an analogy. That's kind of cool. And that makes a lot of sense of like lifting the state up. We do have some questions that came in, and one question says like, are you familiar with Noster by any chance? And what are your thoughts on how it compares to Blue Sky?
Yeah, I'm a little bit familiar. I'm not like super familiar. I think
Okay.
Nostr is a lot closer to kind of peer-to-peer approach where you don't really have the guarantee that you're seeing the same things that everybody else sees because there's no kind of global aggregated view of the network. So clients kind of pass messages to each other through these relays, and it depends like which messages you received, which relays you're connected to. Then like that's what you're seeing. So like different people may see like a different like count on a post. That's not really, for some people that's I think okay. but to us it feels like a regression. It's not what most users expect, and we really kind of are focused on cases where we want people to be able to make apps with that proto that feel exactly like traditional web apps. They should not have any weirdness associated with like decentralization. They should feel very normal, except they're somehow, interoperable and like have all these interesting properties. But it's really because like we use the server, we think the server is important, we think the server's role in the web architecture is important, and we use the server as the place for aggregation of the content from the network, and different apps have different servers. So this is like traditional web model.
Okay, interesting. And then this question, I think, is probably not necessarily related to Blue Sky or App Proto. I don't know anything about the Elixir community, but is there any thoughts what Elixir community is doing with Phoenix Live View, keeping state and rendering everything on the server and sending tiny diffs to the front?
Yeah, I don't. This sounds somewhat unrelated, but maybe it's related on some level. But um, in this case, you have to have a persistent connection between the server and the client. I think for a lot of client-side stuff, that's not really what you want. Like you don't want your text input to stop responding when you lose network connection in like bad like traffic conditions, or like I think for a lot of client-side reactivity, you really want to run stuff on the client-side machine. So I think like I'm more kind of partial to React's approach, where the server is stateless, the client is stateful, the client can re-request some parts of the tree from the server. That's kind of the React server components model, for like submissions and navigations. But then for very fine-grained interactivity, where you just like dragging things or writing things or just like clicking around, I think it needs to be able to provide instant feedback using the same programming model on the client. And so I kind of prefer React's stateful client approach for that.
Interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that Elixir did that. That's really interesting. And then okay, I think one thing I wanted to ask you about, like you talked a lot about like interoperability, and you showed like one app that was an event app, and like you could bring your identity to it, which you did, right? But I'm curious, like, do you have like any vision or imagination of what it like the future could look like if all of these apps are using, or there's multiple apps using App Proto, and they're all like interacting with each other, reading each other's data, and interpreting each other's data?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like it's hard to imagine. You don't really know what's possible until people start doing it. But um, I think of it as just a much more dynamic place, where the incumbents are less, there's less network effects that like, oh, we're forced to stay with this product that we've invested so much time in, because that's just like where all our connections are, where all our posts are. So I'm just thinking it would be like um, maybe it doesn't change how each individual product works that much, but it changes the dynamic where, some kid can spin up a social app that becomes viral, that just reuses existing data and adds a little bit on top, right? Like you can build this like ask me questions kind of things on top of the existing social graph, but like with like an extra feature. Or like people have been discussing like, oh, it would be good if like, what if you could build like a dating app on top of Twitter, but then you have to, like Twitter is not gonna, like Twitter charges uh, quite a lot for API access now, which it didn't used to in the past.
Yeah.
So like, what if we had this kind of dynamics in the system where this is not a thing, where uh, there's like enough momentum that people like developers like this approach, and like users have come to like this approach, where you kind of assume that you're posting into this open system that's like ultimately controlled by the user. And so people can remix apps, people can fork products almost, right? Like create alternatives using the same data. People
Okay.
can integrate data from different apps, aggregate it together. And I don't know, I just think like, and then eventually, like, I think the ending point is really blurring the boundaries between apps, where For example, you can make a Bluesky post with an attachment of the type controlled by another app. And maybe like the Bluesky app would not show that attachment because it doesn't know how to interpret that data. But then maybe that app becomes popular, and later we'd be like, yeah, why not? Like we can show this like event attachment with RSVP button
I see.
because it's just a type definition that we can import and parse and so on. So there's this like ability to kind of apps to start blending with each other and just like kind of blurring the boundaries. And I think that is like I'm curious. I don't know if that's gonna work out, but it is possible now. So I think that could be very interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, this is my last question before I do like a one little short 5-minute game and then we close. But my question is like I think you seem like you're someone that's really passionate about the internet and social media. I'm just curious, like, why do you find it so interesting?
I
I mean, I
I
find
don't
it
know. I think I don't. The thing is, like,
so
I haven't really
valuable.
cared
Why do you
about.
find it valuable? Sorry, go ahead.
I haven't really cared about social media per se. Like again, like when I joined like Facebook, I mostly cared about React. Um, I think like Twitter is a product that I really liked, uh, mainly because that just matches my attention span. Like, yeah, I can read a tweet. Like, don't make me read more. Um, but it's also just like such a fascinating medium for just like drafting thoughts instead of like fully formed things. And I just feel like this medium is underexplored and we're actually like stagnating because companies like Twitter are afraid to make like bigger changes and like experiment with many like different kind of medium changes, like different formats, because they have to not screw up the product. And there's no opportunity for third-party developers to start kind of experimenting. Like, what if we display the same discussions in different ways? What if we like rank things differently? What if we like create these like community spaces that are structured like in a certain way? And people are just locked out of being able to experiment with it, even though it's beneficial for the users. And I think I'm just excited. Like now that I see, oh, this is how it could work, I'm like, just why doesn't it work like this? Like that just makes so much more sense. So I
Yeah.
think that's why I'm excited about it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, now we're just gonna move into this really short game. Basically, I say a statement. It's not a statement I necessarily believe. It's just a random statement. You can do a thumbs up or thumbs down that you agree with it, and if you want to expand on it, you can. And same for the audience. If you all want, you can also participate. Obviously, I can't see your hands, so you can use emojis. First statement is it's okay to keep holiday decorations up after like a holiday has ended. Thumbs up or thumbs down.
It's okay to do what? Say it
Like
again.
decorations up after a holiday has ended. So like let's say Christmas has been done and it's like March. I don't know. Your thumbs up. Okay. You're like it's your house. Do you? Okay. Building a product is harder than building a framework. Do you think it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down? You don't know.
It's hard in different ways.
Somebody did a thumbs down. I'm imagining they mean to the Christmas tree. I don't know. Or and then or maybe they mean to the product and then okay for both. Well, how is it hard in different ways? What you mean?
Um, I think building a libraries and like framework or something like this is hard because you have to find this balance between catering to very different cases and kind of not get hung up on like each particular one. And it's very easy to like go overly broad or overly narrow, and it's just like finding that sweet spot is very hard.
Mhm.
Uh, and then building a product is hard because you have to do stuff that people actually want, and people are not very easy to deal with sometimes. So then if you make mistakes, like that's also going to affect a lot of people.
That's true. I didn't even think about that. And then last is you Well, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without saying it as a question. I'd rather go to the movie theater than watch a movie at home. Thumbs up or thumbs down? No opinion?
I like both.
You don't have an opinion on either. Or do you not like watching movies?
No, I like both.
Oh, you said you like both. I thought you said I don't know. I was like, wait. Okay, cool. At least I feel like you gotta pick one.
It's just a different vibe.
Okay. I like home better. I feel like movie theaters are disgusting and sticky. Um, there's just one question in Discord. Maybe the person came in late or whatever, or maybe they were listening. But could you just shortly say like how App Proto is governed, and then we will wrap up because we are over by 15 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently it's being developed by Bluesky. So it is. We try to be open about the decision making and what goes into it, and like the specs are fully published, and we try to keep it up with like reference implementation and so on. But the decision making is currently done by the company. In the longer term, we would like to upstream it. So we're like beginning early talks with like specification committees like IETF about standardizing at Proto and like parts of it. But we're also pretty big believers in you gotta standardize stuff that actually works instead of standardizing something and then hoping it will work. So it's really like we're kind of proving out like all of these aspects, but really in long term we would like it to be just a part of the web.
Okay, cool. I like that you all were talking to different specs and stuff and seeing who else could own it. That's awesome. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know this went a little bit over, but I was particularly interested in like just how all of the structure and architecture went. I hope this was valuable to y'all. And that's it. Have a good rest of your Wednesday. Bye.
Thank you so much.